urbanization. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, the country went from about 10 million people to 30 in a 20 or 30 year span. New York City alone, from about the 1860s to 1900, went from about 800, 900,000 estimated inhabitants to 3.5 million people. What caused that much population growth? And why was it going to the cities and not being spread evenly around the country? What did those growing cities do with all of those people? Let's talk population, urbanization in the early 1900s. So, from about 1860, 1870 to 1900, the United States grew exponentially. What caused this growth? As we talked about before, immigration. People looking for a better life in this land of opportunity. Agriculture. For most of human history, the vast majority of the people had to be looking for food, producing food, hunting, gathering, farming, whatever. Now, because of new knowledge and new technology, it only takes a smaller fraction. With new machines, seed drill, plows, with new techniques, and with science, fertilization processes, irrigation process, all of these things are improving to the point that large farms develop and not as many people are needed to farm or are able to farm. Government is even supporting this, lowering interest rates so farmers can make the investment to buy new machines so they can grow and harvest more product. So where do these farm hands that are no longer needed go? They go to the city. Where do the immigrants who don't own large pieces of land go? The Industrial Revolution. The jobs were in the cities because machines weren't just helping plant seeds or harvest crops. Machines were also making fabrics and doing all types of things. And the interesting part about machines is they devalue the skilled worker. Whereas a certain skill like weaving or sewing might have been very rare, and some people don't do it as well as others, people could demand a certain price and certain treatment. But now that the machine does the skill and simplifies the activity to that anybody can do it, I can hire and fire people at will. If you don't like the way you're being treated, if you don't like my factory or how I run my business, I'll just get rid of you and get somebody else, teach them how to use the machine in a few minutes, and I'm good to go. There's no halt in production. People start moving to the cities and land becomes very precious, it's in demand, and it starts to get scarce. So what do people do? Start building up. They start building up tenement buildings, apartment buildings, and skyscrapers become the norm. And still today, all over the world, you know a city by its skyline, the different types of skyscrapers that are built in that city for hospitals, for hotels, for office space, and for living space. How do people get around these new overly populated, densely populated cities? What they do is, at first, it's obviously horses. But think about all the problems that horses bring. Horses are soon replaced by various things. Cable cars. Some places tried trains. The same trains that take you across country. But a train around the city or a train going through portions of the city might work. But do you really want trains going through every neighborhood? It's kind of hard to do, hard to build. It takes a lot of space. This elevated rail, today we call them the L. Hey, want to pick up the L and go downtown. Was popular. And some places like Philadelphia, Chicago use these things even into modern contemporary times. Boston, New York made the subway popular. Let's not put people in the air to transport them, let's put them under the ground. So these railroad systems, very elaborate railroad system in many of the large cities all over the Northeast pop. Urbanization, the growth of or migration to a city, so kind of readjusted the social ladder. The upper class was booming. They owned the factories, they owned the land, so therefore they had as much money as they needed. Big houses, stylish houses. People took a lot of pride in their home and how they were built. If you look at most of the medium-sized or small cities today, I almost guarantee that most of them have large apartment buildings, office space, museums, libraries that were once just one person or one family's mansion. The wealth disparity that people complain about today is not necessarily a new thing. As I say all the time, history repeats itself. In this time period, you have an upper class, a wealthy class, that it's very easy for them to spend the average New Yorker's yearly wage at a dinner party. The middle class, also known as the gentry, benefits because they're the managers of a lot of these businesses or factories. Then you have a number of people in social services. Teachers, doctors, lawyers. These people move to suburbs, right outside of the city, on the line of whatever car that particular city used, grew a suburb. Then when Henry Ford creates the assembly line and the price of cars come down, suburbs pop up on every side of a big city because people could simply drive into work and drive home for some peace, for a less crowded weekend, for a less crowded neighborhood, for less crime, etc. The middle class is flourishing to the point average Joe people can hire some help. A servant, a person to help clean, a person to help cook. Average people, they would come in for a few hours a day or week depending on the family, etc. This would help somebody with some extra money who may not have, the skills to do something else. But it also created extra time in an era where there's a ton of things to do with your extra time. The working class. The working class throughout all generations struggles more than the other ones, obviously. Their skill is not necessarily scarce. A lot of people have those simple skills, so therefore their wages are lower. In big cities, they're living in what we call tenement buildings, which is, for all intents and purposes, an apartment building. These apartment buildings were cramped, small, and not always maintained the way they were supposed to. To make extra money, sometimes they'll let somebody stay with them, sleep on the floor, sleep on a chair. They called them boarders. For $1 a day, 50 cents a day, or whatever was reasonable in that economic climate, somebody who couldn't afford their own apartment or tenement would stay there, offering that family a little bit more money and offering them a break from sleeping on the street, being homeless. Women spent some of this extra time in women's clubs. These women's clubs, a lot of times, were book clubs or played small games. They also toppled social issues. Social issues like child labor, social issues like prohibition, social issues like education, social issues like the women's right to vote. A lot of issues that were ignored by politicians before, women bring a new attention to. So let's wrap it up. What do you need to remember? People were moving to the cities in large numbers. One, because of the agricultural revolution. The agricultural revolution made it possible that you need less field hands to produce a good harvest. New machines, new techniques, new inventions made agriculture, the growing of produce, very, very effective. Also, there's a number of immigrants. Some of them don't have the skills or the resources to go elsewhere, so they settle in the cities. Factories and the Industrial Revolution created a lot of jobs for simple people that don't even have a lot of skill. So as people rush to the city, land becomes very dense and compact. People start living on top of each other. Tenement buildings and apartment buildings are built, and transportation improves. We go from horses to various type of cable cars and cars on tracks, and eventually we get the automobile. Class division is apparent, and this is no different. The upper class is flourishing like never before in American history. These are the people who own the land, who own the factories, who own the means of production. The middle class is actually doing better in many instances. Some of them move out right outside the city limits because of improved transportation, and they create what is called suburbs. They become a class of their own, the gentry. Lastly, the poor, downtrodden working class is actually struggling. There are plenty of jobs, and many of them have the means to live, but it's just a living. They don't have certain protections early in this era, so when they go to work, injuries, the amount of hours they work, the conditions in which they work in aren't protected by any regulations or laws. Just another American history lesson for you. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And please watch part 2 of Urbanization, where we talk about crime, pollution, politics, and the do-gooder that make big cities in America what you think of today.